Okay, so it's Friday night, and on Friday night, you know what that means? It's time for comics and some coffee. Alright, so this is going to be a little bit different of a video. This is not an unboxing video. And if you've read the title, you already know what this video is going to be about. So, a little background. I have been a lifelong Frank Miller fan since I was a little kid. And by little kid, I mean late 1970s, early 1980s, so like maybe 1980, 81. And what drew me to Frank Miller as a writer and artist is Daredevil. I think anybody who's a fan of that character and truly a fan of Matt Murdock knows that Frank Miller literally saved Daredevil from being canceled by Marvel Comics. There's been countless interviews that have been done over the decades regarding what was going on with Daredevil at the time and how nobody thought that Daredevil really was going to remain as a published comic for much longer after about issue 170, because the sales were just dropping so badly. Well, I should say probably issue 150 is when they were on the verge of canceling it. So, yeah, I started reading Daredevil primarily because of the cover artwork. And the first issue I ever picked up was issue 174. So, it's a super iconic cover. Anybody who's seen it knows what I'm talking about. But I want to talk about how I met Frank Miller. I didn't get a chance to meet Frank until the early 2000s. And he was attending a convention in, I guess, Central California in the Bay Area called WonderCon. And he was there promoting his new graphic novel and his new book, 300. So this was well past the point when he had anything to do with Daredevil or anything really to do with Marvel. He'd been doing a lot of independent publishing for a long time, but he had done a lot of work with DC. So when I found out that Frank was going to be there, I made a special trip to go to this convention just to meet Frank Miller. So I went with a friend, and I was able to get in on the panel discussion that they were having with Marv Wolfman, Frank Miller. There was a bunch of other people that were there. And I remember we were sitting in this gigantic auditorium, and they did their presentation, and then they were taking questions. And I had a question I wanted to ask, but I was kind of intimidated into not raising my hand. So, but I remember there was this one guy who raised his hand during the question section of the presentation, and he raised his hand, he got called on, and he said, "Hey, I have a question for Frank. Marvel has resurrected Electra, and I want to know how you feel about that." And just like the crack of a whip, the first thing he responds within seconds, I mean, it could have been less than 3 seconds, less than 2 seconds, was, "I killed her, let's move on." And the entire audience was just stunned, and some people were laughing, but most of us were just stunned, like, wow, that was super quick, like, bam, killed her, next question. So I sat there with my buddy, and we sat through the entire panel. And so, you know, I through the whole thing, I didn't raise my hand to ask a question, because my question was more of a statement than anything else. It wasn't really about 300, because I didn't even know what 300 was. I hadn't been following him for a while, though I knew about the Sin City stuff, which I can't remember. Did Sin City come after this encounter? Anyway, so the panel discussion ended, and everybody was filing out of the room, and then we went out to the convention floor, and we're walking among some of the vendors, and my buddy pointed out, he's like, "Hey, here comes Frank Miller." And so Frank was walking through the crowd, and he was walking towards us, and so, you know, Frank is a really well-known figure in the comics book industry, so most people attending the con who had any knowledge of him immediately recognized him. But he was walking, and he was actually walking right by us. So I gathered up the nerve to approach him, and I said, "Mr. Miller," and he turned, as he was walking, he turned and he looked in my direction, and I said, "Hey, my name's Mark, and I just really wanted to say thank you." And he kind of looked like a little shocked, like, "What?" So he's like, thank me for what? And so I said, I want to thank you for inspiring me as a young man to read. I said, because you as a writer and an artist really inspired me at a time in my life when I lived in really, really bad neighborhoods, and to read, because I developed a massive passion for reading and for literature because of the stories that you told about Matt Murdock and his alter ego Daredevil, and how you inspired me as a young person to try and to have a little bit more of a heroic character, to have a greater sense of morality, and to clearly understand the differences between right and wrong when it comes to the decisions that we make. And I said, so I wanted to say thank you for being such a personal inspiration to me in my life through your stories. So at that point, I thought Frank was going to say, oh, okay, well, awesome, glad you enjoyed them, and I thought he was going to walk away. And he looked at me and he said, I really appreciate that. He's like, that's not something I really ever hear. He's like, so essentially he said, thank you for telling me that. And then he looked at me and he goes, hey, do you have any comic books with you? And I said, yeah. I said, I have a couple of books, two of my favorites. I said, that you've ever done that are, have a lot of meaning to me. He's like, well, let me have them. And he pulled out a pen. And when he pulled out a pen, the person that he was walking with, I could only assume was his publicist or his agent. And they looked at Frank and said, I'll never forget this. They looked at Frank and said, Frank, don't sign those books. And by that time, I'd already pulled out. I brought two comics with me. And Frank turned and looked at whoever this gentleman was, and he said, I think I can determine what books I can sign and which ones I shouldn't. And so I pulled out two comic books, took them out of the bags and boards, and Frank signed both of them super quick. And I just had this massive smile on my face. I was just like, wow, I'm meeting one of my comic book heroes that's here, and he actually signed two of my books. And I never asked him to. In fact, I didn't even intend on asking him to sign them. It was just enough for me to actually meet him and have some dialogue with him. So he smiled and he signed the books, and then he walked away and said goodbye. And then he walked through the con. I guess they had some big cruise they were going on, a lot of the artists and writers and stuff. But I was completely blown away by that. So that was roughly 20 years ago. And I don't think Frank is ever going to watch this video. I really, really don't. But what it meant to me on a personal level to have that interaction with someone like Frank Miller was absolutely epic beyond words. Now, I have met a lot of artists and writers over the past 35, 40 years that I've been going to conventions. But this one will always stand out in my mind because in that very brief exchange, I gained a phenomenal amount of respect for Frank Miller's integrity. Because even though his agent or publicist, whoever that guy was, told him in front of a fan, no, don't sign those books, he did it anyway because it's what he wanted to do. So, Frank, if you're watching this video, it's been almost 20 years, but I want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart, how much I appreciate your contributions, especially from the perspective of a young kid that I used to be. Now I want to prove to you the two books that you signed for me, I still have. You signed, on the cover, a Daredevil 181, which is a nicer copy of this book. It's not my original copy, because my original copy I must have read 20 or 30 times when I was a young kid. So it's a little worse for the wear. But you signed this book, which has the death of Electra and one of the greatest stories ever written. And you signed issue 190, where I'm pretty sure Marvel forced you to bring her back. because she was such a popular character. But you signed both of them on the cover for me. I still have them to this day. And I will have these 2 books for the rest of my life. They're not going to be for sale. Maybe someday I'll send them in to CGC and just get them encapsulated. They'll come back green labels, and I'll be proud. Because I always have this memory, I always have this story. And what it meant to me as a fan to finally be able to meet you after reading your stories for 20 plus years leading up to that encounter. So, Frank, I want to say thank you again for all of your inspiration, all of your contributions, and for giving me such a passion for comic books and a passion for literature, a passion for writing, a passion for storytelling, and making me believe in heroes. Thank you so much, sir. And again, Friday night, coffee and comics. If you don't have these books, pick them up. Frank Miller's run on Daredevil, there's nothing better. There really is nothing better. Brian Michael Bendis did a great job, but this is masterclass storytelling. Alright, thank you so much. Enjoy your weekend. Hope you liked the video. Got any questions, any comments you want to make? Put them down below. I will find the time to respond. Alright, thanks so much. Have an awesome weekend. Read what you love, because you never know how long we're going to be around. And stories like this need to be told. And if you've got a story about an artist or a writer that you were able to meet, you know what? Publish your own video. Tell your story. Have a great weekend.